Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Holden's Conversations. Today, I have a recent University of Florida graduate and a bilingual sports broadcaster, Isabella Rivera, with me here today. In the months before Isabella graduated, she was able to cover the Gators win the national championship and speak to Eagles defensive back Quinyon Mitchell just weeks after the Birds won the Super Bowl. Isabella, thank you so much for joining me here today. And more importantly, congratulations on graduating.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to talk about everything.
Thank you. First question. What was it like to cover the Natty? I mean, that had to have been
Oh,
crazy.
yeah. I mean, it was definitely an insane experience. Definitely nothing I would have ever dreamed of. Did not think that I was ever going to be in that position. But my professors trusted me and they gave me that amazing opportunity. And it was honestly just life-changing, you know. It's not something that a lot of people get to do. So I consider myself very blessed to be able to have done it. And it was just, yeah, surreal experience. My heart was racing, I was shaking. It was crazy for sure.
How did you like manage those nerves? I could just feel like, I know you covered the team the whole year, but like that's like a different animal.
No, for sure. It's definitely different compared, them being in the O Dome and the O'Connell Center, then now being in the Alamo Dome in a whole entire different state, being surrounded by national reporters and stuff. It was definitely nerve-wracking. And it was honestly, it was nerve-wracking like as a fan, like yes, I was a journalist, but obviously, I was a student, just like other students. We're nervous. We want them to win. So, I was definitely nervous. I was literally shaking in my seat. Because obviously I wanted them to win, but it was just nervous, just thinking about what's going to happen after. Because obviously that was the first time I'd done anything that high profile. So it was just a matter of, just being in the moment kind of thing and just focusing on my task at hand, which was, writing that recap package afterwards and getting, my thoughts together to convey the story. So it's kind of just focusing on that and just going with the flow and relying on my peers as well. I had three other of my peers with me. So kind of relying on them and, like bouncing off of each other, off of each other's energy. And that kind of helped me, get with the nerves.
I bet like having like three other peers with you kind of uh negated a little bit of that imposter syndrome, which comes from being like a young reporter around a bunch of professionals at major events. Did that help a lot?
It definitely did. When we got there, I mean, I'd say there weren't that many other people our age there for sure, or at least like you know, our professional, our level of professionalism. There were a lot of national, CBS, Fox, all these type of different national news corporations that were there covering this event, and there weren't that many students. There were some other students there, Houston students, Auburn students that we also met there, but there weren't a lot of us, so it was really eye-opening to think like, wow, like I'm sitting here next to a CBS Miami reporter. We're covering the same event right now, and I haven't even graduated college. So, definitely relying on each other and reminding ourselves that like we worked hard for this and we're qualified for this, and we want to do this for a living. So, yeah, definitely relying on each other and giving each other pep talks, motivating each other, and just reminding each other that like we know what we're doing. So that definitely did help a lot.
What was that balance? And I've talked about this a lot. Talked about this with Jada. I've talked about this with other people I've had on the podcast. Um, what is that balance between realizing like, oh, I'm a student, but I also have a job to do? Because if you want to go and reach out to these people when you're there, like, I've gotten to speak to really cool people when I've covered NBA games and just been at other events. And it's because partially like I'm a student, the other people in the room understand that. What was your relationship? What has been your relationship with all events you've covered like that?
It's been interesting, mostly like especially like in Gainesville covering events. It was honestly different compared to going, I guess, like abroad or going to another state, going to another city. It was a big difference because I feel like here, even at the school, even like the level of respect is a little bit different. Even the access was different. We don't get here at the University of Florida, we don't get as much access as we got over in, San Antonio or over in North Carolina, wherever we were. Even the access was really different. So it was like a different level of access that we was unprecedented for us. So it was kind of at the moment was like, I don't know what to do with this. I've never had access to the basketball locker room. That was something
Yeah.
that we didn't have access to here at the University of Florida. So that was something that we had to navigate and, learn firsthand and learn as we went along because that was something we weren't used to. So it was definitely a really interesting experience, getting to learn it as we went along, and kind of like throw away everything we had learned before about covering everything in Gainesville and just kind of go with the flow and kind of just look at what others were doing, looking at what the other national news were doing and kind of like go along with them, but also kind of do our own thing, and stay true to ourselves because, we have a different perspective. We go to school with these players, or these players are around our age. So, it was definitely, we have a different perspective. So it was about tuning into that and then, being true to ourselves and finding that balance for sure.
And on top of it, there are other people who cover the Gators who are not in college year round, but at the same time, being students, we're also talking to students when we're talking to players. And what a student journalist and what a college basketball player have in common is that they're both trying to get to that next level. We're
Right.
all trying to go pro at that point. So there's a level of relatability that even if a student reporter is being a little bit more fierce than other people or more ambitious, college basketball players can see that in their own lens too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, we tuned in. I know when I did like the pregame show for football, that was kind of like our whole angle. We go to school. Some of us have classes with these football
Yeah.
players. So, we have that different perspective. We have like a little bit of an edge, whereas, other independent journalists or other outlets, they're seeing it from a completely different perspective and a different angle than we are. So, it is really interesting to have that perspective and it's unique. So it was awesome to have.
At the same time, do you think covering the team for the entirety of the year um, helped you know what to do with the nerves? Because again, like you said, you're writing a recap, just like you were going to do for the for against Norfolk and against UConn, right? It's the same thing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's basically what I did all semester was, recapping their games because my shift was on Mondays, so I would mostly recap their Saturday games. So, I noticed the patterns and I went to, on Mondays we had media availability with Golden and they would bring in various players, whether it was Martin or Will, whenever they would bring them in. So, I got to, see the progression as the season went on from beginning to end. And I noticed, I noticed those patterns that maybe the national news didn't notice, and they didn't notice until the very end because that's when they kind of tuned into the story. So I feel like that was really impactful for me, because again, getting to talk to them, getting to see them grow. And from the beginning, obviously there was a sense of family and they were really close. You can notice that in the locker room, in this championship or in the Final Four. But that was apparent to me 3 weeks in. Because,
Yeah.
I was speaking to Martin or I was speaking to Will or speaking to Golden, and he was talking about that back in, December, back in January. He was speaking about that dynamic the team had. So I already knew going into even the first round or in the Final Four, I knew going in that this was a big story and that this was important to them and that this was going to be a key factor in their success,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. No, sorry, keep going.
no, yeah, I knew that. That was one of the things that I knew was going to be a key factor in her success. And again, going along when the Micah Hanlockton story broke out, we were there. Some of us were there. I wasn't on shift that day, but we got that breaking news and people were able to speak to Hanlockton. So we knew that that was also going to be a key. We knew what went behind that decision and we spoke to Micah Hanlockton about it. So again, that was another like key thing that we knew was going to impact them down the road.
In a lot of ways, what you're saying is that you were like already seasoned for the moment. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, uh, there was just it's just an extension of how people are behaving in a certain environment. So you can kind of piece that together sometimes when you're not as sure, I would assume. You talked about in your capstone, which I really liked, by the way. I watched all 20 minutes
Thank you.
for prep.
Awesome. Thanks.
Well, I got to know who I'm talking to. But you talked about how you had to submit an application to your sports director. I'm assuming anyone who wants to do something like that always has to do that. But I'm more curious to know about your relationship with your sports director because there has to be a level of trust. You did this for an ESPN company. That means that it's got something to do with the mouse. And if you're
Right.
doing anything
No.
for the mouse, they want to make sure that it's good.
Yeah.
And in order to know something is good, you got to trust in people. And I want to know, like, how have you built those relationships to establish that level of trust in a high leverage situation? I mean, just because you're a student doesn't mean that it wasn't high leverage.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's honestly an interesting story. It's an interesting situation because this was my sports director's first season, first semester with us.
Okay.
He was a new professor. He was a new staff member. So it was honestly really interesting because he got hired back in January or December. And the students were heavily involved with the recruiting process. So whenever there were three candidates left, we got to speak to them and interview them and ask them questions that were personable to us. So I got to speak to now my current or my former sports director. And immediately in that conversation, I knew that I wanted him to be our sports director. He was just a very interesting person, and we had a lot of the same likes. He's a soccer fan. He covered soccer, and that's my favorite sport. So I immediately had that connection with him. And when he came in, I immediately, started trying to connect with him about things. And even before the semester started, he reached out to, there was a Brazilian soccer team coming in. He was like, "Do you want to go cover it?" And I was like, "Say less, I'm there. Let's do it." Even though it wasn't gonna go on the news because the news hadn't started yet, the semester hadn't started yet, I was like, "Let's do it. I want to, learn from you, and I want to see how you work and how you're gonna mentor me in these next couple months." And from there, he noticed my work ethic, and he noticed my work and my talent, and he began to, mentor me, and obviously I was part of the news team that he was going to take charge of. So it was a relationship where he almost immediately started trusting me, really. And that was kind of like the hands-off approach that he took with all of us. He wanted to see what we were capable of, and I think he noticed quickly that I was talented, and I put in the hard work. So once it came to, a month in, it was, or 2 months in, it was March 1st or the last week of February, and he was like, "Do you want to go cover this? No one wants to cover this." I've reached out, and at that point I had kind of like fulfilled my requirements or halfway through my requirements. So I
Yeah.
kind of wanted someone else that hadn't done something yet to, take that opportunity. I didn't want to steal it from somebody else, because I had time to complete my requirements. But he was like, "If nobody else wants to do it, you should do it." So I was like, "Okay." And I showed up on a Saturday to this parade, and I was texting him back and forth, "What do you think about this stand up, that stand up?" And his message was, "I trust you. Do what you got to do." And I was like, "Okay." So, I did what I had to do, and that was really the approach that he took. So when it came down to selecting people for the final four, at that point, I had definitely proved myself. And I had worked closely with him, and again, he had advised me and he had mentored me through all of my shifts and everything. So at that point, I think for him, it was a no-brainer that I should go to cover the final four. And I was blessed, and I was really grateful for the opportunity from him.
So as what you're making it sound like, it's your application wasn't just a piece of paper.
Right.
it was a person. And I feel like
Exactly.
that goes a far way, whether it's like, getting to know people when you don't like they always say at Syracuse, they always say the best time to network with people is when you already have a job or when you're in college, because people know that you don't want anything from them. Now I know you're in college, but just it's this example of like being ready, being of assistance, showing you care about people in moments when nothing is needed, because then that shows people like, hey, I'm not just here to be transactional to get what I want. I'm here for the community. I'm here for you when you need it. It's not just when I want it.
Right. That's totally right, for sure.
So, something I say to a lot of my guests, and I use this word intentionally, is in order to go into this industry, you have to be a sicko. You have to. Like, it comes out in different ways, whether it's you don't believe in sleep, you don't believe in free time, any of these things, no 9 to 5s. How did your inner sicko come out during covering the Natty?
Honestly, that's a good story. I'll have to share that with you because when we first got there, we flew into Austin to then drive to San Antonio. When we arrived in Austin, I was picking up because I was designated to get the rental car. So when I was
Okay.
picking up the rental car, my
That senior, what you got to do as a senior?
sorry?
Because you
Yes,
were the
yeah.
senior?
'Cause
Okay.
I was only paid employee because I'm a producer as well.
Okay.
So
Oh, okay.
yeah, that's kind of how that happened. But yeah, so when we got there, my friends were grabbing my luggage for me, or my colleagues were grabbing my luggage for me, and they call me while I'm outside in the car, and they're like, they left your luggage in Tampa. My luggage was still in Florida. My luggage was not there, you know? So I was like, "Oh, that's awesome," because we wanted to go to San Antonio as soon as possible to get some, get some stuff. That there were the locker rooms were available. We were only gonna make it to the last one, but we wanted to, hit the ground running. And there was a mixer that night with the other journalists, so we obviously wanted to go to that.
Yeah.
But I was like, "Guys, like, I don't know what are I mean, if they reroute to San Antonio, I don't know if I trust this airline anymore. I don't know. I want my bag, And we had some equipment in there as well. So I was like, I want that, we need that bag. So it was a matter of kind of like rerouting our plan and redoing that and finding out what we can do while we wait for this bag to arrive in the next, like, I think it was 3 or 4 hours that we had to wait. So we went to grab lunch because we hadn't eaten all morning, and we ended up going to UT Austin to grab content. And my two friends, they made some amazing content. We helped them out. Me and Jada helped them out. Um, and then we finally got to San Antonio, whatever. And then after that, after the Natty, so the Natty was at I think like 8 p.m. or something like that. And I obviously had to do the recap for the next day, so I had to do it as soon as possible. But our flight left from San Antonio at like 4 a.m. right after that, which meant that
Okay.
we had to leave Austin by like 2 a.m. to drive the 2 hours. It left at 7 a.m. So we had to leave Austin at like 2 a.m. to drive 2 hours to San Antonio to be there 2 hours before the plane left.
Yeah.
So we were not getting any sleep. Like that was the bottom line. We were not getting any sleep. By the time we saw them lift the trophy, by the time we saw them cut down the net, by the time we went to the locker room to get the celebrations, by the time we did all that, it was already like 12. It was already midnight. It was already
And
like
then you got a long day at work in
right,
behind
right.
you.
Exactly. So it was already midnight, past midnight. So it was a matter of going back to the hotel, dropping off our stuff, eating for the first time in like 8 hours, and going straight, like, packing up the car and going straight to the airport. So I ended up sleeping in the car because I had to get some sleep if I wanted to, put my best work forward. So I ended up sleeping in the car. I was working at the airport. I slept on the plane because I had no Wi-Fi. And then we had to drive 2 more hours, I think, from Tampa back to Gainesville. So on those 2 hours in the car, it was me and Jada swapping SD cards, finding footage, finishing everything up, editing everything up, to get it by the 5 p.m. newscast. And then I had to come home and finish up the final details. And I barely got it in on time. I think I got in at like 4 p.m. when they were going to start like rolling everything. So I had no sleep. I was literally on like not even 4 hours of sleep. I was cranky. It was bad, but it was all totally, totally worth it.
And also, you had to be some level of jet lag too, because I mean, there is some time difference, right? It's 2 hours.
I had 1 hour at that time, yeah.
Okay. Maybe not as much, but still,
Yeah.
that's I mean,
But it definitely did impact it because we were an hour behind and they were
yeah.
ahead. So we had, to work a little bit earlier to make sure we got everything in on time. So it was definitely a lot of sleepless nights, less sleep than I usually get. And a lot of just, working hard from one thing to another and pushing out content consistently for sure.
I'm assuming it was worth every moment of it though.
For sure, for sure. Once seeing them lift the trophy and cut down the net and seeing them celebrate, for sure, 100% worth it.
Yeah. I want to harp on something you said. It's not just the sleep part or getting the package in an hour before the newscast, but I think there has to be some element of like news brain and time perception just being so weird. Like again, I was talking to Jada about this the other day as well, but um, you can say, "Oh, I have 3 hours before my package is live or my live shot," and you'd be like, "I have no time." But then you can be like, "Oh, I have 30 minutes before my live shot. Everything is fine," because everything does get done. They always say at Syracuse, "Make air, not art." It does get done in some capacity. So, like, was this an extension of just confusing your mind of like what is a lot of time to report and to get information for people?
No, for sure. I mean, the timing I'd say was probably the hardest part about it all. Again, just because of the time difference and having to get everything in on time and but also, making it good because this was gonna end up on my reel. This was gonna
Yeah,
end up on any job application. So I wanted to do a good job. And I wanted to obviously prove that I was supposed to be here, that they selected the right person to do this. So it was definitely like the timing was for sure something that was pretty difficult. And it kind of happened to us a little bit on that Monday because they wanted each of me and Jada to both do a live shot. And I had a plan in mind where I wanted to do my live shot with a live interview. So I wanted to interview some of the students that were outside waiting to get in. But by the time that we got breakfast and we got to the stadium and with all the traffic that we didn't anticipate, of course, I realized that my plan was just not going to be worth it. And we still had to get some content in for Jada's. So it was a matter of, I was like, I don't think this is going to be possible. So I texted, my sports director and I was like, hey, if we need to cut my live shot, let's go ahead and cut it because I don't want to, stress out the production team, us being an hour behind, try to get this in and it not be the best that I want it to be. So let's just
yeah,
focus on Jada's live shot. Let's get it done. Let's get it in good and good to go. And then, everything else will be fine from there. So that, there are going to be some roadblocks that we're going to hit and stuff. But the timing was definitely different, but it was a matter of, just focusing in and, there were times where when I was doing my recap package, I was in a corner of the Alamo Dome with the hoodie over my head trying to record stuff because where else was I going to record? They didn't have any radio booths or any booths in
yeah.
there. So because obviously I wasn't going to go all the way back to the hotel just to, record something. So, it was stuff like that it really was, the timing really was really important.
Yeah. in your capstone, you talked a lot about this, but I mean, you know that there was a lot made of the objectivity of especially University of Florida journalism students at the Final Four in the Natty. In your capstone, you you were very, very, very firm on that your goal was to be objective and to give the most sober, fair analysis you could, independent of the fact that you go to Florida and you are a Florida fan. Um, how did you do that?
It was honestly really difficult, and I learned that pretty quickly with the game against Norfolk State because again, this was I hadn't really covered an event as such as high profile as this. So it kind of hit me like a truck right then and there in the middle of the Norfolk game. I was like, why am I shaking right now? Why am I smiling right now? What am I doing? Why am I giving glances to my colleague right now? I got to keep it together because I was
Yeah.
looking around and I was like, no one else is acting like this. No one else is hype. No one else is having reactions. Like I would look to my right and the person next to me was, stone cold, like no expression, hyping it up the whole time. I look to my left and the other person's also, writing stuff down, not even making any expressions. And I was like, okay, I gotta lock in. Like this is for real. Like there's no way I'm gonna be the only person like oohing and awing at everything going on. So I learned that really, really quickly right at the Norfolk State game that, there was no way that I was going to not be objective and I was going to let my emotions or I was gonna, honestly, like I felt like honestly like embarrassed. Like I didn't want to get looked at like, oh, she's a student journalist. Like, what is she doing? Like, I did not want to get looked at that way. So I made it right after that Norfolk game. I was like, I need to lock in. Like, I need to make sure that I'm not, I'm just gonna do my job. And especially, I was like, win or lose, because I obviously didn't know if they were gonna win or lose. Like, I hope that they would have won, but I was like, I have to set that aside because even though obviously this is a good team, they're a deep team. They have the capacity to go all the way. But win or lose, I have to make sure that I'm being objective and I'm putting down the facts and not just, heartbreak. Oh, this sucks. This is the facts because, for one team it's heartbreak, for one team it's celebration, whether that's for the Gators or not. So, I had to just put it down on paper that this is what, the facts and not let my perception and my following of the team. Yeah, I've gone to the games. Yeah, I've supported them. Yeah, I've cheered. But right now, I'm not here for that. This is not a free ticket, and
Yeah.
sometimes, people take it like that, especially us being students, it's like, oh, you just want a free ticket. The amount of times I've heard that, like, oh, you want a free ticket. Oh, you're so lucky. And at the end of the day, for the football games, oh, you're so lucky. And I'm like, well, at the end of the day, I have a job to do, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you have a
Yeah.
job to do, and I think the fun isn't the fun is that you're getting to do something you love. It's not like, oh, I get to
Right.
go root for the team. I feel like a lot of times, if you can compartmentalize it like that, then it is a free ticket because you're doing something you love. But it's not
Right.
like, oh, I'm going, got my pom poms. I got my Gators gear. Like, uh, I forgot. Someone asked me once, like, what I wear to like cover Suns games. One, I'm not a Suns fan even, but even if I
Mhm.
was, they were like, "Do you wear Suns gear?" I'm like, "No, wear a
Definitely.
shirt, maybe sometimes a tie. Got my nice shoes on, my Kohans, like, you know, got my
Right.
nice pants on. Everything. Absolutely not. And no fandom involved. But I do think one thing is really important, and this was talked about a lot online when Florida was covering won the Natty. The media landscape has changed in a lot of ways. Everyone knows that. But what is important is that you have to build your own personal brand. And in some ways, that has made people lean into more like, hey, I'm not a reporter, I'm a fan. Or I'm an influencer, I'm a content creator for this said team. Like there is like a fine line, and you got to know where to plant your foot in the ground for what you want. What's your moral compass? What do you want people to go for you for? But at the same time, like you need some level of platform, and that is created by engagement, and that's the process for that is so different now than it used to be.
No, for sure. I mean, we definitely ran into that for sure. And honestly, I feel like I was lucky enough that not only was I there for TV, but I was also there for ESPN Gainesville, and that's for
Yeah,
social media. So, it was a matter of kind of like, no, I wouldn't say using it for to my advantage, but taking the opportunity to grow my platform. Like obviously ESPN Gainesville, I was also trying to grow that platform because I was a part of that team, and obviously like that was I was in that, I guess I would say that class, that experience. So I want to grow the ESPN Gainesville platform, but
yeah,
also how can I use that to grow my platform as well, and using the event to grow my platform as well. And, I was lucky enough to be in that position where creating content for ESPN Gainesville, I could kind of collaborate with myself and, I guess like show myself off and show myself on camera and show off my skills on ESPN Gainesville to then tie that into like my personal brand So that way, when you see that, it's kind of associated with my brand. My brand is associated with ESPN Gainesville, and I was able to use that to my advantage. So I was lucky enough to have that. But it was definitely important. I noticed that it was important, especially during the Natty, because there was a lot of that social media presence. And a lot of people were there for social media, and it's just, of course, it's a national story. It was obviously I needed to use that to my advantage. I couldn't pass up that opportunity to get this national news and kind of center it to me and make sure that I was using it to my advantage to grow my personal brand for sure.
Yeah. And speaking of content, you said that you and the other students had to be, and I quote, intentional and quick about getting your content, not just because of tight deadlines, but also because there were so many reporters there. When I covered Syracuse basketball, I did it my freshman and sophomore year. I was more on the timid side, so I didn't realize how to be ambitious and eager and honestly compete with the other journalists who do this as a job. How were you not just intentional and quick, but also decisive? um, when getting that content. When there's, I mean, I was covering a Syracuse game in the Syracuse Dome. You were literally at the Natty and there's every reporter known to man. How did you and your team create that strategy? Was that more beforehand planning or just like in the moment spontaneity?
It was definitely in the moment, because you never know, who's gonna, where the reporters are gonna kind of shift to, and you never know who really is gonna be in the locker room. So, like especially when we first go into the locker room, usually like the starters or like the three stars of the game, the three MVPs, I would say, they're usually not in there at first. They're usually in the press conference area. So we kind of have a chance to like go towards the other players. And usually the national attention isn't there yet. So at first we kind of have a little bit more leeway, a little bit more flexibility, but we do have to be intentional and quick if you want to get that before the national attention comes in. And we don't want to waste these players' time. These players, this part is not their job to talk to journalists. It's a part of their job, but obviously it's not the best part of their job.
Yeah.
So we don't want to bother them and we don't want to, like impose too much on their privacy as well. They're eating. Sometimes they were eating and we had to be like, hey, can we ask you a question? They're mid bite, they're mid chew. So we have to be intentional. We have to, flexible and balance everything around us. And then once the national attention comes in, we obviously want to talk to Elijah Martin, but there's 10 other reporters, there's five other big cameras, there's five other phones also in their face. So we either have to be, the first ones in there, but if we were the first ones in there, it has to be for a reason. We can't just go in there and not know what we want to ask them. We can't just go in there, just how do you feel? We will have to ask an intentional question. We also don't want to ask, we don't want to wait and then ask the same question that three other reporters already asked him.
Yeah.
How does it feel to win the Natty? Five people have already asked him that. So, it was a matter of, obviously being attentive, especially since there were four of us, it was a little easier for us kind of like split up kind of thing. We also had to help each other film, but making sure we're listening to what the other reporters are already asking them. And if we have a question in mind, asking it as soon as we can. If it's interjecting and making sure that we get that question in, that's what we have to do. Or, sometimes if they're asking questions that we maybe don't want the answers to, but I'm like nudging my partner. I'm like, hey, put the mic in there so we can get that soundbite if we need it. Even if it's not the question that we want to ask, even if it's not the best angle, let me get a good angle. Let me zoom in. Let me do what I have to do, put that microphone in there. So if we get the sound bites we need, or if locker room time is done, we want to make sure that we got the sound bites we needed. So it was definitely a matter of being confident, injecting ourselves in there, making sure we get that microphone and get that camera in, even if it's not the best angle, even if it's not the best audio, making sure it's in there so that we get what we need because we also have a job to do just like all of the other national outlets.
How, I mean, that what you're describing is very quick environment. You've also done a lot of Spanish sports reporting, and you also were able to interview, like I said in the intro, Eagles defensive back Quinyon Mitchell just weeks after him and the Birds won the Super Bowl. How did those other experiences prepare you for this moment?
I'd say the interviewing Quinyon Mitchell was an interesting experience because I just wasn't expecting that to happen at all. And that was about a month-ish, maybe 2 months. Yeah, about a month before the Natty was happening and that whole experience was happening. So that's kind of like when, it started settling in and, starting to get these high profile interviews and high profile events that I was covering. Because, I was obviously covering the Gator stuff and all that stuff. But, I went from that to then a Super Bowl champion. And
Yeah.
that was just such a huge shift that again I wasn't expecting. I went to the parade and I interviewed the local pastor, I interviewed his cousin, And then all of a sudden, the one of the cops or the police officer was like, "Oh, you want to get up here? Let's go, let's go." And I was like, "Oh, I didn't know he was accessible right now. I guess let's get it done."
Yeah.
Because I saw another outlet, but I was like, I didn't know that y'all were just letting anybody up there. Let's do it, you know? So I went up there and I was like, I obviously had questions because I obviously anticipated, I wanted to interview him. So I had questions prepared. But I know that I didn't want to waste his time, and I'm sure that other people had already asked him, "How does this feel? How do you feel right now?" Those are, I guess, basic questions that I know he'd heard
Yeah.
before. So, I was thinking like, what can I ask him? What can I stray from that I already have? And I know that I wanted to make it quick. I didn't want to waste his time, and I could tell that he was a little bit on the shyer side. And I even wanted to interview his mom, and she was also on the shy. She was like, "Oh no," she declined. I was like, "Okay, well, I can tell they're shy." So I was like, I don't want to, impose too much. I don't want to give him some
Yeah.
too complicated of a question. So I just got in there and I got out. I did what I had to do. I got my picture taken. Let's go. Let's get it done type thing. So, and I definitely use that what I learned then in the national championship when I'm covering March Madness. I knew it was a high profile. I knew that these athletes, they have a job to do. And I didn't want to waste their time, and I want to make sure that I'm getting an angle that not all the other outlets are also not getting, because that's kind of the advantage that I have is, being able to get a different perspective, get a different story, and make myself stand out.
Do you think being bilingual just helps understanding how to talk to broader communities as well?
For sure. I mean, the Hispanic community isn't as big in specific sports, in like football, I never really came across, but it definitely does help. I mean, in the case of Urban Klabsar, who I was able to interview, it was honestly surprising. Honestly, I didn't even know that he spoke Spanish that well, at least. I didn't know too much of his background, and when I was going into March Madness, doing my research, and then my partner mentioned it. Oh yeah, he does, and I was like, oh, this is news to me. So I was like, I definitely have to take advantage of this. And in speaking to him, we kind of like built that connection. We were able to have like a conversation. I almost forgot that the camera was there for a second because I was interested in seeing who this basketball player was besides basketball and besides Gators basketball. So it was honestly really cool to see because I feel like in English, he doesn't get interviewed much. He's not a starter, so he doesn't get as much, media attention. So, I know just him getting that media attention was for him, it was already like we were building a connection. But being able to talk to him in Spanish, we got to talk about other things. We got to talk about soccer. He lives in Spain, so we got to talk about that. And in that moment, it was definitely an advantage getting to talk to, getting a different story, different perspective, that, the other outlets weren't getting, even if it wasn't a national headline, obviously, but to me it mattered. And, to my, I was doing it for Noticias WFT, so for that it mattered. For me, it mattered. Same thing with, talking to Isaiah Brown. Again, he's not a starter, he's a freshman. He didn't play that much during March Madness, but being able to connect with him and his ethnicity, which I also share, again, it's not a national headline, but it meant something to me, it meant something to him. I was able to collaborate with a Puerto Rican outlet as well. So it meant something to me, and it was definitely like something that I can again put on my reel, I can put on my resume that just makes me stand out. So to me, it's opened some doors for sure.
And just another thing is when you find something that you have in common with people, not just you, anyone, it creates a more genuine connection and also one where you're going to get better sound bites too, because you're peeling back the curtain in an industry that can be so superficial a lot of ways, and you're showing like, hey, I care about you, I acknowledge who you are as a person. You're not just here so I can get my lead in, or I can get my sound on tape.
No, for sure. And I think that's so important. I love that aspect of it because I have noticed that that's how it has been in the media industry, especially as social media starts to take over. It's
Yeah.
about getting that soundbite. It's about getting that high profile player. And, for me, that's never really been the goal, like even in March Madness, I kind of let my colleagues kind of take that. I kind of let them, either go interview Will Richard, interview, Clayton, do what you got to do. And I took pride in, going to interview Clouds or going to interview Isaiah Brown. And that really, honestly, like, it gave me more adrenaline than, interviewing Will Richard. No offense to them. Like, I love all
Yeah,
of them.
no.
They were all such amazing players. But, to me, I obviously I noticed that in the media industry. And it's not, I'm not the biggest fan of it, and that is the reality. But if I'm able to, kind of set myself apart from that and not fall to that and do, what makes me happy and what interests me and what interests different communities and different types of people, then I would do that, and that would make me the happiest journalist.
Speaking of goals, what is your goal? I know
You
it's a
know,
loaded
short
question.
term, long term.
Give it all. Give it all.
I mean, definitely. I mean, I guess now short term, I'm applying to jobs. I'm definitely trying to get that sports reporter role, wherever they'll take me. I'm also looking into social media roles just because I had that duality. I did a little bit of everything. I made sure to do a little bit of everything while I was in school. I did radio, I did social media, I did broadcast, I did, the writing, even though it's not my forte. I did it all. So wherever I can, get my foot in the door is kind of like my immediate goal right now is getting my foot in the door. I definitely want to, be able to start my career and start it off strong, and see where they'll take me. But long term, I want to cover soccer. I want to, that's my favorite sport, and that's a sport that I kind of connect with the most. And I want to be able to get into that industry, the soccer industry, and cover it, whether that's as a reporter, as a writer, as a social media. I guess my dream job is, I don't know if you've ever watched the Golazo Network. But they do like a pre-show, pre-game show and a post-game halftime show for the Champions League soccer. And there's this woman named Kate Scott who I love, and I want to be like her. So I want to host a soccer show maybe someday down the road, hopefully. But definitely right now it's about getting into the industry for sure.
Just a few more questions for you. Um, you obviously, I mean, I don't know you until I only know you via Zoom for the last 40 minutes, but obviously I can tell that you went into graduation with a ton of momentum. A ton. I mean, like, those are incredible experiences. What has that done for your confidence knowing that as you put a bow on your time in Gainesville as a student reporter, going into the job world, like what has that done for you mentally, looking at every situation?
Honestly, I mean, it's done a lot for sure. I feel like, I guess compared to the beginning of the semester, I felt like I didn't have as much on my resume as I wanted to. I mean, I obviously had a good amount. I had a solid foundation, but I felt like I wanted to get more for my reel and more for my resume, more for my portfolio because I have big dreams and I have big goals that I want to achieve. So compared to the beginning of the semester, I knew that I wasn't where I wanted to be just yet, and that was really scary at the moment because I know I had to start applying to jobs and everyone was starting to apply to jobs. And I just felt like I wasn't ready for that yet. Um, but now comparing and looking back, I started off January, everything was steady. I had a couple of packages in there. I had gone to a couple things. I started doing my reporting and my anchoring. And then March hit and everything kind of just exploded. It was kind of just like a snowball effect starting in March. March 1st, I started off the month strong with Quinyon Mitchell. And from there, I kind of like rode that high and I continued going. And that honestly really motivated me to keep looking for these opportunities that were going to be impactful for me. So every time an opportunity came my way, I had to take it. And that continued in going into March and right after, right before the Quinyon Mitchell stuff. I had had a goal since last year to moderate the panel at our symposium. And I realized that was coming up. So I was like, maybe that's the next thing I want to put on my plate. That's the next thing that I want to accomplish. And I set that goal for myself and I achieved that goal. And so I kept writing that and writing that. And, it kind of like it all kind of blew up in my face by the time April came in because there was just so much going on because I had other classes I had to take care of. I had Noticias, I had the news, I had ESPN Gainesville. There was so much going on. That it kind of blew up in my face because I was traveling, I was here, I was there. But being able to accomplish everything and then, the week before graduation, it kind of all just stopped. And I looked back and I was like, wow, I did a lot. And, I was like, now I have to make sure that I get all of this together and use it to get a job.
And I'm
So,
assuming find a way to have more than 4 hours of sleep a day as well.
right, exactly. Yes. I was like, finally I can rest, but not too much because I have another goal, which is to get a job. And I felt like after everything, I feel so much more confident now just because I've covered high profile events. I did a lot of social media stuff that gained a lot of traction. I did so many packages and I developed and I honestly grew and improved so much just over the course of this last semester that I feel so much more confident now going in that I can get a job that I want.
Last question. When did you realize you wanted to be a journalist?
Honestly, I can't say that I was that young. Even going into college, I had chosen journalism as my major, but I hadn't done journalism at all really growing up. I guess I had kind of done social media. I loved being the social media person for like my clubs and my honor societies. I loved creating graphics and, talking to my peers. But I didn't work for the newspaper. I didn't publish anything. I was doing a little bit of writing, obviously, but that's for like, the state tests and stuff. I wasn't really doing any journalism work in high school at all. And even going into college, I was online at first. I was part of the PACE program. So again, I wasn't a journalist until my junior year, or yeah, my junior year was really when I started in the Innovation News Center at the University of Florida. That's when I started becoming a journalist. I took my first journalism class, my reporting 101, basically. That's when I became a journalist. And even then, I wasn't really sure that's what I wanted to do because I didn't really enjoy it that much at the time. And they didn't allow me to do sports yet. So I wasn't really immersed in that yet. And obviously, I loved sports, but I wasn't doing it yet. I had taken a sports management class. I didn't enjoy it either. But I think it was when I studied abroad in London, to covering soccer and going to the stadiums, and we had to do a project. We had to write a multimedia piece, and I had to do interviews. That was like kind of the first time that I really did a piece that I enjoyed, because it was sports. So that at that moment, I used the skills that I had learned so far, which I hadn't, again, I was still a junior and I had taken my first classes, journalism classes. So that's kind of when I was like, okay, I kind of like this. And then after that, I joined Noticias, I joined ESPN Gainesville, and I started going to high school games. And that's when I realized this is fun. And that's when I realized, like, doing the writing, doing the video taking, I was interviewing, local high school athletes. That's when I really realized that I wanted to be a sports journalist. And then when I was able to finally do my first anchoring, either for Noticias or for the sports segment on WFT that summer, about 2 years ago now, that's when I realized this is what I like. And I really enjoyed it. And so, yeah, probably like maybe 2 years max that I really wanted to be a sports journalist. But I think once I made that my goal, I really stuck with it and I really made sure that I wanted to reach it. So,
When you realized that this is something that you wanted to do, what is something that you wish you could have told yourself back then that you know now? And that's actually the last question.
no worries. Um, Man, I mean, I guess back then, kind of like what you said, I was a little bit shy back then, again, because I hadn't really done that much journalism work. And I mean, I guess I would tell myself to not be shy and to not shy away from those opportunities, because I feel like I looked to my peers and they were doing a lot more than I was at the time. So I felt like I was behind. So I guess I would tell myself, like, don't worry about being behind. Don't worry about any of that. Just focus on what you want to do and focus on using those opportunities that the school is giving you. And going from there. I feel just not worrying. I feel like I worried a lot back then because again, I felt like I was so behind as a junior. And I feel like now I'm just not really behind anymore. So just telling myself, don't worry about being behind. Just focus on the task at hand. And my best work forward and making sure I'm learning above all. I feel like I would tell myself that, and that would have given me a little bit more confidence back then, like I have now.
Thank you so much for your time, Isabella.
Of course. Thank you.